Have you ever felt close to someone, yet constantly unsure where you stand with them? Not because they said no, but because they never clearly said yes. That uncertainty can feel heavier than rejection. It keeps your mind awake at night. It makes you replay conversations. It makes you question your value. And slowly, without realizing it, it trains your brain to chase clarity instead of peace. If you've ever dealt with an emotionally avoidant person, you know this feeling well. They pull you in, then pull away. They show warmth, then go cold. One moment you feel special, the next moment, invisible. And the most painful part? You start blaming yourself. Stay with this until the end, because by the time this video finishes, you'll stop guessing, stop overthinking, and finally understand what emotional investment really looks like, especially when it comes from someone who fears it the most. Here's the truth. Most people never tell you. Avoidants don't confuse you on purpose. They confuse you because they are confused themselves. Human psychology has a deep fear wired into the brain, the fear of emotional dependency. For avoidant personalities, closeness doesn't feel like safety. It feels like danger. When most people get closer to someone they care about, their nervous system relaxes. For avoidants, the opposite happens. Their nervous system goes into alert mode. Connection feels like loss of control, and the brain will always protect control before love. That's why their behavior looks so contradictory. They want connection, but they fear what connection costs them. This is where your confusion begins. Your brain is wired for patterns. Consistency feels safe. Inconsistency feels threatening. So when someone gives you mixed signals, your mind works overtime trying to decode meaning. You tell yourself, if I can just understand them, everything will make sense. But uncertainty keeps dopamine high, and high dopamine keeps you emotionally hooked. This is not weakness. This is biology. The human brain becomes obsessed with unfinished emotional loops. That's why unanswered messages hurt more than harsh words. That's why emotional distance feels louder than rejection. Silence forces your mind to fill in the gaps, and avoidants create a lot of silence. They disappear emotionally, they delay responses, they avoid deep conversations, they change topics when feelings come up, not because they don't care, but because caring feels unsafe to them. And this is where people get it wrong. They assume emotional investment always looks warm, always expressive, always reassuring. But with avoidance, emotional investment shows up as tension, as hesitation, as inner conflict. Their body wants closeness, their mind wants distance. So instead of leaning in fully, they hover, they circle, they test, they retreat. And if you don't understand this psychology, you'll misread everything. You'll think distance means disinterest. You'll think silence means indifference. You'll think inconsistency means lack of care. But the truth is more complex. Avoidants fear losing themselves inside connection. They associate emotional dependence with weakness, often because early life taught them that needing someone was dangerous. So when feelings grow, they don't feel joy first. They feel threat first. This creates a push-pull cycle that deeply affects the person on the receiving end. You start trying harder, explaining more, proving your value, lowering your boundaries just to keep them close. And that's where the real damage happens, because when you chase clarity from an avoidant, you unintentionally confirm their fear. They feel pressured. They feel overwhelmed. They feel like their autonomy is at risk. So they pull back even more. Not because you're too much, but because they don't know how to hold closeness without feeling trapped. This is why emotional confusion feels so exhausting. Your heart wants certainty. Your brain wants answers. But the situation keeps denying both. And over time, your self-worth begins to erode. You stop asking, do they care? And start asking, what's wrong with me? nothing is wrong with you. You're responding exactly how a human nervous system responds to unpredictability. You're trying to stabilize emotional ground beneath your feet, but stability doesn't come from decoding someone else's silence. It comes from understanding the psychology behind it. Because once you understand how avoidants process emotional investment, their behavior stops feeling personal. It stops feeling like rejection. It stops controlling your emotional state. And that's power. In the next part, you'll learn what avoidants fear most when emotions deepen, and why that fear is actually the strongest indicator that they are emotionally invested in you. Watch until the end, because what you're about to understand will shift how you see every signal, every pause, and every moment of distance from now on. Have you ever felt like someone was emotionally close to you, yet always just out of reach? Not distant enough to let go, not present enough to feel secure, just enough to keep you thinking, hoping, waiting. That space between closeness and distance is where confusion lives, and confusion is one of the most powerful emotional triggers in the human mind. If you've ever been involved with an emotionally avoidant person, you know this feeling. You don't feel rejected, you feel unsettled. And that unsettled feeling slowly becomes exhausting. Your mind keeps asking the same question in different forms. Do they care? Are they invested? Or am I imagining everything? Stay until the end of this video because you'll gain clarity most people never reach. Not clarity about them, clarity about what emotional investment actually looks like when it comes from someone who fears it. Here's the truth most people never hear. The human brain hates uncertainty. It's wired to look for patterns, consistency, and predictability. When those things are missing, the brain goes into overdrive. That's why mixed signals hurt more than clear rejection. Rejection closes a loop. Uncertainty keeps it open. Avoidants don't give you closure. They give you fragments. A warm moment, then silence. A deep conversation, then emotional distance. A sign of care, then withdrawal. And your brain tries to connect the dots. Psychologically, this creates emotional fixation. The brain releases dopamine when something feels unpredictable. That same chemical is involved in addiction. This is why you keep replaying interactions, why you analyze texts, why you remember small gestures, why you wait longer than you should. Not because you're weak, because your nervous system is trying to regain balance. Avoidant behavior disrupts emotional rhythm, and when rhythm is disrupted, the mind searches for control. This is where self-doubt begins. You start thinking maybe you said the wrong thing. Maybe you asked for too much. Maybe you cared too deeply. Maybe if you were calmer, quieter, easier, they would stay. That belief slowly changes how you see yourself. But the truth is simple and uncomfortable. Avoidants don't confuse you because you lack value. They confuse you because they struggle with emotional closeness. Emotional investment for them doesn't feel like safety. It feels like exposure. Most people associate closeness with comfort. Avoidants associate closeness with loss of autonomy. Their nervous system learned early that relying on others leads to disappointment, pressure, or pain. So they adapted. They became independent, self-reliant, emotionally guarded. And when connection starts to matter, their defense system activates. This doesn't look like aggression. It looks like distance. They delay emotional responses. They avoid deep conversations. They change the subject when vulnerability appears. They go quiet when emotions intensify. To you, it feels like disinterest. To them, it feels like self-protection. This is the part that creates the deepest confusion. Because emotionally, they are involved, but behaviorally, they are restrained. So you feel something real, but you can't see it clearly. And the human mind hates emotional ambiguity. When affection is inconsistent, the brain assumes danger. It triggers anxiety, hypervigilance, overthinking. You start scanning for signs, tone changes, timing, small shifts in energy. Your emotional world begins to revolve around their availability. That's not love. That's survival instinct. And here's where motivation matters. The goal is not to decode every avoidant behavior. The goal is to understand why confusion feels so powerful, so you stop losing yourself inside it. Because once you understand the psychology, something changes. You stop taking distance personally. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop trying to prove your worth. And this is important. Avoidants don't respond to pressure. They respond to emotional safety. But emotional safety starts within you. When you no longer need clarity to feel stable, the dynamic shifts. When you stop chasing certainty, you regain power. When you become grounded, their fear has nothing to push against. This is why understanding comes before action. Most people rush to fix the relationship. They ask for more communication, more reassurance, more commitment. But without understanding the psychology, those actions backfire. Avoidants retreat when they feel emotionally cornered, not because they don't care, but because closeness activates fear. And fear always chooses distance. So before you ask whether an avoidant is emotionally invested, you need to understand the emotional battlefield you're standing on, because emotional investment doesn't always look like pursuit. Sometimes it looks like restraint, like hesitation, like internal conflict. And if you misinterpret that, you'll either walk away too soon or stay too long trying to earn clarity. In the next part, you'll learn what avoidants fear most when emotions deepen, and why that fear is actually one of the strongest signs of emotional investment. Because what you're about to understand will shift how you see every signal, every pause, and every moment of distance from now on. Have you ever felt emotionally connected to someone, yet constantly unsure if that connection was real? Not because they pushed you away completely, but because they never fully let you in. That kind of uncertainty doesn't scream, it whispers. It sits quietly in your chest, and over time, it drains you more than any clear rejection ever could. You replay moments, you analyze words, you remember the warmth, then question the silence. And slowly, without noticing, your emotional energy starts revolving around one question. Are they emotionally invested in me? Or am I just hoping they are? If you stay until the end of this video, you'll gain something most people never get. Not reassurance, not false hope, but clarity. The kind of clarity that calms your nervous system and gives your power back. Because confusion is not accidental. It has a psychological structure. The human brain is wired for certainty. Predictability equals safety. Consistency equals trust. When those things disappear, the brain activates stress responses. That's why mixed signals hurt more than rejection. Rejection is painful, but it's clear. Uncertainty keeps the mind trapped. Avoidant behavior creates emotional ambiguity, and ambiguity keeps you stuck between hope and doubt. One day they are warm, another day they are distant. One moment they open up, the next moment they shut down. Your brain tries to make sense of it. You think, if I could just understand them, everything would be okay. But the truth is, your brain isn't looking for answers. It's looking for emotional stability. And when stability is missing, the brain becomes hyper-focused. This is basic human psychology. The mind releases dopamine in unpredictable emotional situations, the same chemical involved in addiction. That's why inconsistent affection feels so intense, so consuming, so hard to walk away from. This doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. Avoidants unintentionally create emotional loops. They give just enough connection to keep hope alive. Then they pull back to protect themselves. And that pullback triggers something deep inside you. Your nervous system senses withdrawal, and it interprets it as a threat. So you try harder. You become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. But what often happens next is subtle and dangerous. You stop focusing on how you feel and start focusing on how to keep them. This is where self-doubt enters. You begin asking yourself questions that slowly erode your confidence. Am I asking for too much? Am I too emotional? Am I being dramatic? Should I lower my expectations? And without realizing it, you start shrinking emotionally. But here is the truth that changes everything. Avoidants don't create confusion because they don't care. They create confusion because emotional closeness activates fear. For avoidant personalities, intimacy feels like exposure, like losing control, like being dependent. Their nervous system learned early that needing someone leads to pain or disappointment, so they learned to rely on themselves. They became independent, guarded, emotionally restrained, and when real feelings start to form, their defenses rise. Not because love is absent, but because vulnerability feels unsafe. So instead of leaning in, they hesitate. They pause. They distance themselves emotionally. To you, it feels like disinterest. To them, it feels like survival. This mismatch is what creates confusion. You feel connection growing. They feel fear growing. And both experiences are real. The human mind struggles most when two opposing signals exist at the same time. Care and distance, warmth and withdrawal, interest and avoidance. That internal conflict keeps you mentally engaged. You start monitoring behavior, tone shifts, response times, energy changes. Your emotional state becomes dependent on their availability. This is not love. This is your nervous system trying to regain balance. And here's the motivational truth. The moment you understand this psychology, you stop taking everything personally. You stop seeing distance as a verdict on your worth. You stop chasing clarity that someone else cannot give consistently. Understanding breaks emotional dependency. It helps you see that confusion is not proof of connection, and certainty is not something you beg for. Because real emotional power begins when you stop needing answers to feel grounded. Avoidants don't respond to pressure. They respond to emotional safety. And emotional safety starts with you. When you stop trying to force clarity, you regain your center. When you stop chasing reassurance, your nervous system calms. When you stop over-explaining, you stand taller. This isn't about walking away. It's about standing firm within yourself. Before you can know if an avoidant is emotionally invested, you must understand why confusion feels so intense and why it keeps you stuck. Because emotional investment doesn't always look obvious. Sometimes it hides behind fear, behind restraint, behind inner conflict. And if you misread that, you'll either stay trapped in doubt or abandon yourself trying to feel chosen. In the next part, you'll learn what avoidants fear most when emotions deepen, and why that fear is often the clearest sign of emotional investment, like internal conflict. And if you misinterpret that, you'll either walk away too soon or stay too long trying to earn clarity. In the next part, you'll learn what avoidants fear most when emotions deepen, and why that fear is actually one of the strongest signs of emotional investment. Because what you're about to understand will shift how you see every signal, every pause, and every moment of distance from now on. Have you ever felt deeply connected to someone, yet constantly unsure if that connection was solid or slipping away? Not because they walked out, but because they never fully stepped in. That kind of emotional uncertainty is quiet, but powerful. It doesn't explode. It slowly wears you down. It keeps your mind busy long after the conversations end. And it leaves you questioning something far more dangerous than the relationship itself, your own worth. If you've ever found yourself stuck in this space, stay until the end. Because what you're about to understand won't just explain their behavior. It will calm your mind. It will protect your self-respect. And it will give you clarity most people spend years chasing. Here's what no one tells you about emotional confusion. The human brain is wired for certainty. Certainty equals safety. Consistency equals trust. When those are missing, the nervous system goes into survival mode. That's why mixed signals hurt more than rejection. Rejection is painful, but clean. Uncertainty is addictive. Avoidants don't give clear answers. They give emotional fragments, a meaningful conversation followed by distance, a moment of warmth followed by silence, a sign of care followed by withdrawal. And your brain tries to make sense of it. You replay messages, you analyze tone, you remember the good moments and question the quiet ones. Your mind keeps searching for a pattern that feels stable. This is not weakness. This is psychology. When emotional signals are unpredictable, the brain releases dopamine, the same chemical linked to addiction. That's why inconsistent affection feels intense, why it feels hard to let go, why clarity feels just one conversation away. Avoidants unintentionally create emotional loops. They connect, then retreat, not to manipulate, but to protect themselves. And this is where confusion begins to damage you, because when clarity is missing, the mind looks inward. You start asking yourself questions that slowly reshape your identity. Did I say too much? Did I push too hard? Should I care less? Should I be quieter, calmer, easier to deal with? Over time, you stop asking if the situation is healthy and start asking how to adapt yourself to it. That's the danger of emotional ambiguity. Avoidant behavior doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like potential that never fully arrives, and potential keeps hope alive. The human brain struggles most when two opposing truths exist at once: care and distance, interest and withdrawal, connection and avoidance. Your emotions sense closeness. Their behavior signals restraint. Both can be real at the same time. For avoidant personalities, emotional closeness activates fear. Not fear of you, fear of losing control. Their nervous system learned early that relying on others leads to pain, pressure, or disappointment, so they learned to rely on themselves. Independence became safety. Distance became protection. And when emotional investment begins to grow, their defenses activate, not because love is absent, but because vulnerability feels dangerous. So instead of leaning in fully, they hesitate. They slow down emotionally. They pull back to breathe. To you, this feels like disinterest. To them, it feels like survival. This mismatch is what creates confusion. You are seeking emotional grounding. They are seeking emotional safety. And both of you are reacting from your nervous systems, not logic. This is why chasing clarity rarely works. When you push for reassurance, avoidants feel cornered. When you ask for consistency, they feel pressure. When you express emotional need, they feel exposed. So they retreat further, and that retreat triggers your anxiety even more. The cycle repeats. You try harder, you wait longer, you explain more, and slowly your emotional world starts orbiting their availability. That's not love. That's emotional survival mode. Here's the motivational shift you need to hear. Confusion is not a sign of connection, and clarity is not something you earn by sacrificing yourself. The moment you understand this psychology, something powerful happens. You stop personalizing distance. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop measuring your worth through someone else's emotional capacity. Understanding gives you control. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop collapsing. Avoidants don't respond to pressure. They respond to emotional safety, and emotional safety starts inside you. When you become grounded, their distance loses power over you. When you stop chasing certainty, your nervous system calms. When you stop overanalyzing, you reclaim your focus. This is not about fixing them. It's about stabilizing yourself. Because before you can truly know if an avoidant is emotionally invested, you must understand why confusion feels so intense and why it keeps you emotionally stuck. Emotional investment doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it hides behind hesitation, behind restraint, behind inner conflict. And if you don't understand that, you'll either abandon yourself trying to feel chosen or stay trapped in doubt, waiting for clarity that never fully comes. In the next part, you'll learn what avoidants fear most when emotions deepen, and why that fear is often the strongest signal of emotional investment. Before you can know if an avoidant is emotionally invested, you must understand why confusion feels so intense and why it keeps you stuck. Because emotional investment doesn't always look obvious. Sometimes it hides behind fear, behind restraint, behind inner conflict. And if you misread that, you'll either stay trapped in doubt or abandon yourself trying to feel chosen. In the next part, you'll learn what avoidants fear most when emotions deepen, and why that fear is often the clearest sign of emotional investment, like internal conflict. And if you misinterpret that, you'll either walk away too soon or stay too long trying to earn clarity. In the next part, you'll learn what avoidants fear most when emotions deepen, and why that fear is actually one of the strongest signs of emotional investment. Because what you're about to understand will shift how you see every signal, every pause, and every moment of distance from now on.